In this lesson, we're going to show you some great information about controlling the 2D versus 3D endpoints of our levels. We do have to kind of really spend a bit of time on levels because they play such an important part in our projects and our documentation. So I'm going to start a new project again with just my Revit structure template file, which we know has two levels in it. I'm going to go down to that same south elevation. So what I want to talk about in this lesson is this 2D, 3D button, okay, over here. What happens is when the hollow circle represents what would be the 3D button. So what that means, or the 3D extent. Now, first of all, this lock, I've talked about it, but I want to clarify right away. All this does is make it so that when you do, if it's locked, when you move this endpoint, it'll move any other one, and there could be 5 or 6 all lined up. There could be a whole tower of them. Okay, we're just using 2 for now. But when you pick on a level and it has this with the blue line, it means it's going to move them both. So unlocking this, all that does is allow you to move that control. Okay, and again, this just turns the check mark on and off. I'll turn it off just because there's less stuff there in the way. Okay, so as we move it, and when you go back again, bink, it's going to realign itself. You can't really stop it from doing that. Again, if you want to move one of them, if you move it, it moves them both. Endpoints, okay? And if you unlock it, then you can move it separately. So that much is that more or less. Okay, now we're going to talk about this 3D, 2D button. And in order to first talk about it, let's think about this. Remember when we went to our 3D view here and we turned on the show me the work plane. We can see this, okay? Think about it this way. If this is our south elevation and this is our north elevation, if I go to the south view and I pick on here and I drag this out on the right hand side, what that means is when I go to the north view, my left hand side will be pulled out. So as I'm pulling and pushing my level lines, you have to realize that if I'm doing it from this side, it's on the right. When I look from this side, it's on the left, on my left. Similarly here, if I drag this out from this view over here, from my east elevation, it'll be on the right hand side, and if I go to this view, that edge will be on the left hand side. So think about that as we talk about this. So here we are in our south view, clicking out. I'm going to draw a reference plane in here right now, just from the end point of here, just so we can kind of escape on the keyboard. I'm going to pick and kind of drag this guy down. Notice they have 3D and 2D as well. We'll talk about reference planes later. So this is right at the end of there. So watch what happens when we go to the north elevation. We go to the north, okay? There's that same elevation line, okay? So if I pick on here and unlock this, and let's turn off the symbols for the time being because it's easier to pick this, okay? And I drag this, okay? Notice it's kind of moving on the right hand side. If I go to the opposite view, it will have dragged this side out, right? Left on this side, right on this side. If I take this guy and drag it back down, realigns itself, but more importantly, if I go to the south, I'll notice that that is now dragged over. So it's reciprocating on both sides. That's the first thing you need to remember. Whether this is turned on or off makes no difference. Okay? If I pull both of them out, well, if I go to my north elevation, then clicking out, they'll both be turned out. Again, I can turn this on or off. That actually doesn't play any part. Picking on here, turn off the bubble. Okay? So just remember, same as east and west. If I go to the east side, I'll draw a reference plane just so I kind of know where I am. Escape on the keyboard, pick on there, drag it up. I'm going to take this guy, unlock it, and pull it in. Now when I go to the west elevation, okay, it's going to be, the gap is over here. The only difference is that I have these guys turned off and on a little bit. But here the gap is on the right, and here the gap is on the left. So just remember when you're pulling and pushing these level lines that you're impacting the opposite view. So now we've got that covered, right? We've got our aligning tool, we've got our dragging and our opposite views. Now we move along. The next thing is, if you pick on here and you pick on the blue 3D and it goes bloop and it turns to 2D, notice that the hollow circle disappears. Now if I grab this little dot and drag it, okay, it's only changing it in this view, clicking out. Notice if I pick back on here, the hollow circle is still there, which is the 3D point. Only in this view, in the east elevation, I'm going to drag this out. So if I go to my west elevation, there's no impact over here, okay, because it's still set to be 3D. Picking out, watch, back to my east elevation. Okay, I'll grab this 2D point and I'll drag it inside. Picking out, big gap on the left. Go to the west elevation. Okay, there should be a gap over here, but there's not because I set it to be 2D. Back to my east elevation. Okay, to get this back to be 3D, there's a couple of ways to do it. One is you can pick on here and simply drag this and drop it back into that, and it'll turn it back into a 3D point. Now if you drag the 3D point, I want to unlock it, align it, drag that over, and I go to my west elevation, I'm going to see the impact, of course, because it's back to being 3D. I can turn this one and say you're 2D, start playing head games with you and pick and lock that one up, and you say, well, it's all lined up, everything's good to the right. You forget that the 3D point is still back there. Go back to my east elevation because this guy's set to be 3D. Now I can set this guy to be 2D as well. Okay, look, this guy's 2D. Oops. Drag this 2D point. I'm wheeling out while I'm dragging it, by the way. Drag it way out here. Okay, so on the east elevation, the 3D point is still there, but the 2D point is there. Go to the west elevation, clicking out, pick on here, the 2D point is here, the 3D point is there. If I drag this guy back, that doesn't impact this view at all because the 3D point is being ignored. Okay, the other way to reset to your 3D is to click on the level, right click and say reset to 3D extents. Okay, not maximize 3D extents. That's different. So reset to 3D extents, boom, click out, basically resets it back to be the 3D extents wherever it happens to be. If I go to my west elevation, this one hasn't been reset. I need to do it per view. I need to pick on here and say right click, reset to 3D extents. It's back to there. Click out. Pick on here, turn this guy on, turn this guy off, click out. Now they're both set to be 3D, so I might drag this guy out. Maybe I want a little bit past there. Okay, that's going to reciprocate over here because it's been set to be 3D. Okay, picking on here. Again, move it to be 2D. The 3D point is there. So you can either drag the 3D point to the 2D point, and it'll turn it to 3D, or you can drag the 2D point to the 3D point to reset it, or you can simply click the level line, right click and say reset to 3D extents, and then click out. Take the 3D line, bring it back to here, turn this guy on. So each view has the opportunity to have its own representation of, is it showing 2D or is it showing 3D? Each end, okay, of each side, okay, each end of each side has an opportunity to show the 3D or the 2D. If it's set to be 3D, the reciprocating view will change if it's also set to be 3D. The key is the 3D point does transcend across to the other view no matter what. It's a matter of, do you want this to show 3D or not? If you say no, I want the 3D point to be there, okay, where it was, but I want my 2D point to be out here. So the two 3D points are still there. You might wonder why you want this. That'll come clear a little bit later on when you start working with projects. All we want to get across in this lesson is the fact that you have the opportunity for the endpoint to be 2D or 3D, each level, and each view, north, south, east, west, plus the sections. No different. If I go back to here, I go to my View tab, make a cross section through here, click out, open this guy up. Okay, in this section, I can do the same thing. Oh, I shouldn't say that. That's right. In a section, it automatically assumes 2D because it's only a little portion of the whole view. That makes sense, right? This section is only from here to here, which would make sense because the level is going to be much bigger than that. So it's always going to be 2D. Otherwise, it would go right off the sheet. So this is just assuming 2D. Is that my section? Yeah. So it's assuming 2D, and if you want it to be 3D, then you have to say right click and sections you can't reset to 3D. Interesting. You have to manually do it. It does show you where the 3D point is. But generally you don't want your sections out at your full 3D points. That's more for your kind of your full-on building sections or your elevations. And again, I'm using two fingers here, panning with my middle finger while I'm holding down the mouse button, clicking out. Okay, so sections and details are almost always set to be 2D because you never really want to see the great big sprawling level lines. Okay, so good lesson on 2D, 3D endpoints of the level lines. And again, you can search on our CAD Clips, Revit CAD Clips page for the word level. You'll find lots of lessons as well.